All right. Penultimate lesson. That's the one before the end, right? So, we're going to be talking about transformations of quadratic graphs. Kind of. We could actually probably retitle this lesson to be vertex form, writing equations in vertex form, writing quadratic equations in vertex form, because the transformations bit we've actually kind of already talked about recently. And so we're going to remind you of that. We're going to pop up a slide, kind of remind you of those pieces, but we're mostly going to talk about going from here to go to there, right? Now, the one thing I do want to note that this is the standard form of quadratic, right? We've seen that before recently. With this right here is the vertex form of a quadratic. We've seen that recently-ish. That one's not as quite as recent. This is kind of new-ish, but not really, because we've seen this. We've seen the dilation, we've seen the horizontal translation, we've seen the vertical translation, all of that stuff recently-ish. Okay, so one thing I want to note before we talk about how to go from here to there is that this A is not necessarily the same as that A. Okay? Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. Let's jump into an example and we'll show you what we're doing. So we want to write this that is in standard form in vertex form. Now, the way we're going to do this is we're going to use our old friend completing the square. So here are the steps. Really pretty straightforward. Let's go. Let's do it. So the first step is to rewrite the equation with this C term shoved over. So we're going to rewrite it like this. Now, if A is 1, then what we need to do is we need to figure out what we're going to add on here. Now, if A isn't 1, we'll see an example of that soon, then we've got to do one more step and all those things, just like in regular completing the square to solve for the roots or whatever, right? Okay, so hair is going nuts all of a sudden. So here we're just going to do the same thing we always do with completing the square. We're going to do the green part. We're going to do b divided by 2, so 6 divided by 2 squared. 6 divided by 2 is 3. Squared is 9. So we're going to add 9 right here. Now, we can't just randomly add 9 in the middle of an equation. That's not legal. They'll take you off to math jail. We can't be having that, right? So how are we going to do that? Now, normally, we would add at 9, and then we would add 9 over here, but that's going to like mess it all up because we don't want y to have junk on it. We want y to be all pristine and happy. You know, we don't want y to get all bullied. We need to keep the bullies off of that. So how can we add 9 here? Well, just by subtracting it off again. So if we add 9, we can subtract it off, and then that keeps the value the same. Our equation's balanced. It's all happy. Y doesn't have any bullies. Easy peasy. Now we can factor this bit. No problemo. Right? So we know from our completing the square lesson that this will factor into x plus 3 squared. It's always x, and then this one here, plus or minus, whatever it is. If it's minus 3, it'll be minus 3, et cetera, you remember from a couple lessons ago, right? And then squared. Now, what are we going to do with this bit on the end? Well, we're going to just do the math. Negative 5 minus 9 is negative 14. Look, it's in vertex form. There it is. Happy. No problem. Ooh. We're going to have to circle that. I kind of went crazy with our size there. That looks fine. Let's do another example and then remind you of some things real quick at the end and then be done. This is going to be a fairly quick one. Okay. Jumping here, we got y equals negative 2x. Uh-oh, A isn't 1 this time. We're going to have some weirdness. It's going to be okay. Excuse me. So, on this one, we've got all this. We want to write it in vertex form. So we start with the same steps as before. We're going to write the same thing. I'm going to move it up so I have plenty of space. I need to probably make my brush smaller. I think that's why we ran into issues on the last one. Y equals negative 2x squared plus 8x, and then we bring over and do minus 3. Now, this time, so we can't go straight to finding the b parts, because in order to find the b part, a has got to be 1, right? For completing the square. A has to be 1, so we got to get rid of this. So what we're going to do is we're going to factor out an a. Okay, so we're going to write this as y equals negative 2. And then we're going to factor. Now, this is important. In this particular example, we're not going to end up with a fraction, but it's important to remember that when you are factoring out a thing, you're dividing each term by the factor, dividing by negative 2, and that's how you're getting the number, right? So this could end up with a fraction and whatever else, but in this particular problem, it's not, right? That one, of course, just goes away and turns into x squared, which is what we expect and what we want. This one turns into minus 4, right? I'm going to leave a little, minus 4x, I should say. I'm going to leave a little gap because we're going to put our green part in there, and then I'm going to bring down my minus 3. Now, I got to figure out what the green part is, right? So that's going to be this divided by 2 squared. So negative 4 divided by 2 squared. Negative 4 divided by 2 is negative 2. Squared is 4. So we're going to add 4. Now, you might think erroneously that we would just subtract 4, but we can't just subtract 4 because, of course, we can't just subtract 4. We've got to take this into account. Now, it's real easy to take care of that. So we are going to subtract 4, but we've got to multiply that times this beginning, right? Because in that, now we're taking out what we're actually adding in, right? So we've got to not forget to multiply that there, and that's all there is to it. If this was a fraction or whatever else, we'd do the same thing. Fractions are just numbers. Can't say it enough. Once again, for the people in the back, fractions are just numbers. When you're supposed to do something with a whole number or an integer, and it's a fraction, you do the same thing. Exact same thing, right? Hey, so now we're moving on to just the same thing we would normally do. So we're going to do y equals, and then the negative 2 just comes down. This, of course, factors into x minus 2. It's always this one. Remember, if you're like, I don't know what you're talking about, you need to go back a couple lessons to our completing the square lesson and look at that one, because that is where we learned that topic. Now this, we're going to do the math. I'm going to go ahead and do it. I know it's Algebra 2. I know I keep saying it's Algebra 2. Let's skip steps. And on this is a little bit ugly looking, so just want to make sure we're good. We're going to do the multiplication first. So negative 4 times negative 2 is positive 8. So then our final answer is y equals negative 2 times x minus 2 squared. Negative 3 plus 8 is plus 5. Vertex form. Oh, I'm punching that in just a bit too early. So, to remind you of how to graph things from vertex form, we have this from a few lessons back. I think it was actually from last unit, but this is all review from fairly recently, right? If we have h change in here, if h is positive, it shifts the graph to the left. If h is negative, it shifts the graph to the right. If k is positive, it shifts the graph up. If k is negative, it shifts it down, whatever it is. If a is negative, it reflects it. It flips it over, right? Now, if a is positive, it's still just up and down. It opens up. If a is negative, it opens down. If the absolute value of a, so was positive or negative, if it would still stretch, even if it was negative, it would just be stretching further. But if it's greater than 1, so if it's 2, 3, 5.831, whatever, fractions are just numbers. Decimals are also fractions. So yeah, it's decimals, fractions, all the things. They're all the same thing, right? Fractions are just numbers. Decimals are just fractions. It's all going to be okay. You got this. It's going to be all right. If a is greater than 1, so 2, 3, anything bigger than 1, 1.2, it stretches vertically. It gets more stretched to the sky, or if it's negative, then it's going to get more stretched to the earth or whatever, down. If it's between 0 and 1, aka it's a fraction, so it's 1/2, it's 2/3, it's -5/6, something between 0 and 1, then it vertically compresses. So instead of being like this, it's going to go down like that. This is just a reminder. We've got examples in our notes of stuff like that. You can go back to Unit 3 where we talked about that if you don't have it, if you're like not in my class or whatever else. That's all we're going to do for this lesson. Hope it's been helpful for you. If you're not one of my students, let us know in the comments how I'll see if we can help you with math, science, or anything else. If you are one of my students, I'll see you in class. Do your homework. For Pete's sakes, do your homework. Direct correlation between actually doing your work and doing well. That's just kind of how life works. So we'll see you later. Bye-bye.